In this video, I'm going to review the contour line hand assignment and talk about everything we covered in class. Your goal is to draw your hand in 3 different positions. So you could decide to have your fingers open and extended or closed like a fist, and wherever your thumb is placed, your viewpoint if you're viewing the hand from the side or from the front. And then we're going to wrap ribbon around them to make them appear more 3D. Now, when we clean up our lines, what we want is a contour line style. And that means that we have this clean use of outlines that defines the hand and the features of the hand, but we also have some line variation, meaning while these lines are clean and all connected, we may use some lighter broken lines to represent the folds and creases of the skin. So to begin, I'm going to look at my hand. I'd like you to look at yours as well, because it'll be best if your drawing captures the visual of your specific hands. All of our hands are going to look different, but I'm going to look at my hand in this position like we did in class. I'm going to keep that right over here. Okay, so that's what I'm looking at. And we're going to use construction lines to begin, which are light, sketchy lines to make sure that the placement and the proportions are intact before we actually begin using contour lines. So I'm going to place my wrist down at the bottom. I'm going to lightly start to pull a line upwards. And then on the left side, I'm going to pay close attention to the angle that I see here, the actual angle from the first bone that would be part of my thumb. So I'm going to try to get that placed where I see it. The most important thing is that when our fingers are bent, that we don't make it seem like the fingers are curved to bend. It's really angular so that the bone structure of our hand makes sense. And when we use those dotted lines, we're trying to capture the muscle structure, like the musculature within our hand as well. So right now I'm dealing with the bone structure mainly. I see a change in direction here. My thumb is starting to travel upwards. Then I see a couple lines that I'm going to indicate would represent the creases in my thumb where this part of my knuckle would be. So when I'm looking at it from the side, I could see those creases that indicate the bend. And my personal thumb does travel out to the left as it gets closer to my fingertip. So now I'm drawing the other side of my thumb, so trying to get the thickness about right. And here is the area where it looks like my thumb connects to my palm. So I'm going to add a dotted line, dashed or dotted line, so I know that that's what I'm looking at, and a dotted or dashed line here. And I can also indicate my thumbnail. It's going to look like it's a little wider towards the tip. And we talked about this in class, but I think it helps if our fingernail, like our thumb, if I indicate, let me zoom in, that the skin actually is a little bit above this part of the nail, so it looks like our nail is emerging from the skin, typically looks more lifelike. Little details like that, little touches make a big difference. So I have my thumb. It might not be 100% perfect right now, but it's close. That looks enough like my thumb that I could move on. What I'm going to do next is indicate the couple of wrinkles and creases that I see, or folds, where my thumb finger meets the palm of my hand. And these folds are just indicating the position my hand is in. There are going to be a lot of folded areas in the skin because your hand changes position arguably more than any other part of your body besides your face. So your skin needs to be really flexible in order to do that. And these lines indicate our folding lines. So I'm working my way up towards the base of my first finger. And height-wise, it looks like my first finger begins about where my thumb ends. So like I'm not going to go higher than this. That looks to me like the base of my finger from my viewpoint. So I'm going to use some dotted lines to indicate that's where my first finger will begin. We'll come back to do some of the folds and creases here because we need to make sure that this makes sense before we commit to anything, but I'm going to begin my first finger right now. So lengthwise, my finger should look like it's not quite as tall as my palm itself. So the area between here and here should look like it's greater length than my first finger. So I'm keeping that in mind, and I'll show you how we can double check that in a moment. Following the path of my finger with my eyes, and I'm recording what I see with my pencil. Looks like my finger gets a little wider at my knuckle, so I'm trying to make sure that that is represented. And the area where my fingertip is located up here looks like it's not quite as wide as the base. Okay, so that's true of my specific fingers, okay? Now, before I add my detail lines to show where the creases are for the knuckles, I'm going to double check this height we were talking about. If I place my finger, so if I place my pencil on the fold right here where the finger begins, and I place my other finger down where it meets the palm, I could see this is the length. And if I compare that to my first finger, I could see it's not as long as that, which is what I wanted. I didn't want this to be as long. So that means that my estimation when I drew this visually, just from looking at my finger, was good. If my first finger wound up being longer than the palm, then I'd want to reevaluate that. But this looks like the proportion is okay so far. Maybe I'll just give that one tiny bit more height at the top. And that seems pretty good. Okay, so now I'm ready to move on to the remaining fingers. Now for this pose, I have my fingers placed like this. That's how I'm looking at them. So you can see this diagonal that travels down where my second finger, then my third finger, and my pinky, they all start at gradually lower starting points. So I'm going to look at this line first, and I'm going to try to match that here. So I have the actual rise of my second finger. And then as soon as this comes up and over, I'm going to draw a construction line that's diagonally aimed downwards. This line is going to help me with the placement of each of these fingers. Now, looking at my second finger, I'm also going to try to make sure that the length makes sense. I could see it winds up more or less in the middle of my palm, and it's the lowest point of my fingertip is like right in line with this region at the base of my palm. So I'll put a mark there so I could be sure that that's where I wind up. And like I said, it winds up in the middle of the hand, so I don't want my finger going in this direction. I really want it just traveling downwards and winding up right about here. So I'm looking at the line on my hand where I'm seeing this first part of my finger, and I'm drawing that down and indicating the creases that I would see where my joint would be. And on the other side, I'm going to try to get the width of this finger about right. In this area, I'm going to draw some dotted lines or some broken lines to represent the knuckles. And now I'm going to change direction slightly. This is going to head down to my fingertip. I placed a mark here where I wanted my fingertip to wind up, and I wound up exactly in that spot, so I'm happy about that. Okay, here's what that looks like. When I place my fingernail, I'm going to place it just slightly off to the right, so there's a little more space here on the left, whereas my fingernail is actually making contact with the right side, so it looks like this. There is my first finger. I'm probably going to round this out a little. It looks a little bit flat at the tip when I was using construction lines to form that. So now I'm just going to clean that up, and there we go. Next, when I look at the base of this finger, I can see there's some creases that travel downwards from my first finger, so I'm going to draw both of those in. This is what I'm seeing on my own hand. And also on the left, I can add from here a line that looks like it's emerging from beneath this finger and traveling off to the left side of the hand. You can see that on mine. It's right here. There it is. I see a secondary line right here. So I'm going to make sure that that extends a little bit further. And that helps to make the skin feel natural. All right, so I already placed these lines. I'm looking at my fingers. I'm starting the next one along this diagonal, so I know it begins lower. The knuckle is going to be lower, so the dotted lines for the knuckles are going to be placed here. And the fingertip itself is also going to be a little bit lower. That's only due to the orientation of my hand right now. I'm going to place the fingernail again. This one looks a little closer to center, actually, from my viewpoint. Okay, there's what that looks like. And now my third finger, making sure my hand is still in the position that I had it in. This is the pinky, so it's going to be the smallest finger of all, which means the knuckles are going to look like they start here, pretty much even with the knuckles from my last finger. And the fingertip is also going to look like it ends about there. So I don't have so much length in this finger or width. And I'm placing the fingernail again, and I have pretty good layout for those 3 fingers right now. I think I could get rid of these construction lines. And now I need to complete the palm on this side. Notice we never did the remaining part of the wrist because we weren't sure where that was going to wind up. But now we can get into that. So looking at my hand, you see that the finger actually isn't even with the edge of the palm. I still see some of this fleshy area traveling outwards. So I'm going to start from the pinky, see if I can match some of that angle, and I see a line that looks like a crease coming out here that helps me understand this fold. Then this is going to look like it's a curved line that travels inwards and has its own set of creases that works its way out from the edge. I could jump back to where my thumb is and bring these lines up and around because the fleshy part of our thumb is actually going to be much bigger than just the finger itself. So I would consider this to all be part of the thumb portion of the hand since the thumb does so much moving. I see some more lines right here. And I think at this point, what's in my palm is looking pretty good. So now I could double check the wrist, start to draw this back down. And then because it's a cool detail to actually be true to whatever you're wearing, if you're wearing bracelets or rings or whatever, makes your hand look specific to yours. I'm wearing a shirt that has a sleeve. You can see the sleeve is wider than my wrist. So I'm going to indicate that by drawing the sleeve back on this side, having it overlap my wrist and having it be longer on the right, because that's what's physically happening on my wrist right now. And then I'm going to erase this line. That's why it was construction line. This is a good representation of hand number 1. The last thing I would do is look at my wrist, make sure I have a dotted line, dashed line that's indicating the folds in the skin, the creases right there, and that would be one completed hand. Now that I've done that with construction lines, the process of transitioning this into contour lines can be done first in pencil, where I'm just going to go around the outer edge and just kind of clean things up as a whole. You want to look at your hand as you're doing this so that you can make sure your line is never really ending, but is working its way into those folds and creases and into the fingernails. And that helps to make this look really cohesive as you do this. So I'm transitioning right into these dotted or dashed lines. And ultimately, we're going to do this with Sharpie, like Sharpie pens and ultra-fine Sharpies. So you'll just be following these pencil lines, these cleaned up versions. So we don't want the Sharpie to look like it has a sketchy quality to it on the outer edge of your fingers. We want it to look very smooth and very controlled. So that's what I'm doing right now with my pencil. I have my hand in my eye line so I can refer to that, and maybe I'll catch details that I didn't see the first time. Okay, so that's what this is looking like. If you look at the left side, that's contour line. I would continue going over these sketchy lines with these cleaner lines. For hand number 2, I'm going to draw a hand in this position, and this will be the starting point for my ribbon. So it'll look like the hand is holding the ribbon that will ultimately weave in and out of the page, taking up the negative space, and help to connect the hands overall. So the ribbon could be passing in front of and behind the other hand, passing beneath the fingers. And our goal really is to limit the negative space, so maybe I would add even more ribbon here, so that when we fill this in, we could shade the negative space black in marker, and that'll make the ribbons and the hands pop. So I'm going to hold my hand in this position. I'm keeping it right out of frame. I'm going to have this hand enter from the left side, and I'm going to begin the same way by drawing the path of my thumb. This time it's in a completely different position, but the technique will be the same. My thumb's traveling up this way, then it changes direction and travels off this way. This is where I begin seeing some dotted and dashed lines for my knuckle. And then my thumb's going to travel down and over. Here's about the length. Now I'm going to show the thickness of my thumb, bring this upwards in this area. And then because my thumb is folded over differently than down here, it's not extended, I see some creases in my skin. And this is the region where my thumb's going to look like I have big creases where it meets the palm of my hand. So here's the beginning. I'm again going to indicate my thumbnail, which gets wider towards the tip. And I'm going to make it look like it emerges from beneath my skin. Okay. Now that the thumb is on there, I could start to use that same method of drawing what looks like construction lines to determine where my other fingers are going to go. So I'm drawing a line up. This is going to be the basis for my first finger, then my second finger, then my third finger, and then my pinky. And that would mean that my palm is roughly this size. This is my estimate as of right now. My palm should take up about that much space, and this would be my wrist. So I did that very lightly, because now we're going to be able to do this for real. The first edit I'm going to make is I think my first finger needs to come up a little bit more. So I think right there is the spot. Compared to my thumb, this finger is more or less in line with it. So I'm going to draw a line down this way. And then it's going to curve inwards to represent that's where my finger would turn. And then down here, this actually becomes my fingertip. My finger is basically heading away from me in this area. And then where I see the knuckle, this is where my finger is more flat from my viewpoint. Like this is traveling flat, that's traveling away. So I'm really going to see the top of my fingernail. I'm not going to see so much of the bottom of it, especially when I factor in the other folds in my skin. So for right now, it looks like this. Finger number 2 is going to start here. This line is going to look similar to finger number 1, the way this comes down. The knuckles are going to be a little bit lower, just slightly, and then these aim inwards. And again, my fingertip is sort of going to disappear into the folds in my skin. So that's okay for now, what that looks like. Finger number 3, you see this is starting to have a real 3D effect because we're incorporating a bit of perspective into this. Looks like our fingertips are traveling away from us into the distance, which happens to be into our palm. There's finger number 3. And then finger number 4, the pinky. So this one's not going to be so wide. Knuckles are going to be here. And I'm really not seeing too much of the fingertip this time. Okay, here's what my fingers look like. I'm going to see a little bit of the edge of my palm. So my estimate was actually fairly accurate. The only thing that was off with my estimate is my palm's going to come down a bit further to about here, and that's where it'll meet my wrist. So I'm going to change this pathway. I'm going to take a close look at the actual fleshy part of my thumb and make sure I get these lines right. It looks like the fleshy part comes up here, and then I actually have some folds of the skin in my thumb in this area that my fingertips are kind of pressed up against. Okay, I got some dotted lines traveling in this direction. Here's where my wrist meets my palm. I'm going to have a line here and one coming up this way. Again, I'm wearing a sleeve, so I am going to indicate right here that I have the sleeve and that it's leaving my wrist, mainly on the right side. I'm going to bring this down. So here's what that looks like. Okay, the next step would be to use contour lines, still looking at my hand, to clean these areas up. So here's what this would look like with contours. Going around my fingernails, going right up to the creases in the skin that neighbor these. And that's going to make them just look more finite, because right now all my lines look very sketchy. I just wanted them to really just place all of my features in the hand and see if I was in the right territory. And now that I feel like I am, these lines will be more controlled and have more of a finished quality to them, slightly more refined quality. So that's what the contour lines look like. Now, to begin the ribbon, I'm going to begin with a series of lines that are parallel. So I'm going to emerge right here to start. So here's 1, 2 lines. Okay, there's my first 2 lines of this ribbon. I'm going to erase the part of the palm that they overlap so it's clear that the ribbons are in front of the remainder of the hand. And I'm going to decide what path would be cool or fun to work with. So I'm thinking I'm going to bring this, in this case, I'm going to have this ribbon go in front of the wrist. So I'm going to draw 1 line, just establishing this as I go. That's going to be the pathway right there. So I need to make sure that the second line doubles this and follows it in a manner that's more or less parallel. Okay, and I've done that. So now I can erase this part of the wrist. This is why it's so important to draw lightly for all of these beginning phases so we can make these edits. Now, if I want to make it look or appear like the ribbon is changing direction here, because this is a large piece of the ribbon, and I feel like right here it's going from down to over to the side. So I think what I'm going to do is take this top line and I'm going to continue it until it actually connects with the line on the left. So it gives us this turnover kind of feel. If I erase this down a little bit, what we get here, the result is that we get this effect where it looks like we begin by viewing one side of the ribbon, and then here it like flips over. So we're seeing the inside of the ribbon, now we're seeing the outside. And it makes it even more obvious if I add some hatching lines here. Anytime we see one of these turnovers, which is a way of indicating shading using line as opposed to what we did for our last project. Now, if I want to change the direction of the ribbon again, let's say I want it to travel up and under the fingers, or if I want it to go maybe behind the hand for right now, I can loop this line around, this top line. I'm just going to bring it back this way. Okay, so now that's a loop. I'm going to use a line to connect these two. So the bottom line now just connects into that loop. And then to make sure we see the same thickness here as back here, I'm going to draw a secondary line right there. So this again gives us an indication that we're looking at the front of the ribbon, then we're looking at the back of the ribbon. And with some hatching lines, it helps to make sense of that to our eye. I also like adding hatching lines wherever the ribbon emerges from behind the hand. That just helps to distinguish those areas for our eye. So I'm picturing that this ribbon travels behind the hand and then comes up and over. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to have the ribbon loop over this way. So here's my loop. Then I'm going to add a line and show that the ribbon would have thickness here. And I'm going to add a line that shows that the ribbon has thickness here. And I'm going to add some hatching lines and some hatching lines. So now this ribbon continues on this side, and then if it emerges from the fingers on the right, I'm just going to draw that, do a little more erasing. I like the fact that in this case it looks like my ribbon is kind of following the contours of the hand in many ways, just visually. And now I decide where I want this to go. Now I am going to have a third hand up here, and you will too. If you're lefty, you could draw your right hand. If you're righty like me, you could just flip your page and draw your left hand again in a different position. So it emerges, it could be like upside down, and that's fine. There's no rule against that. So I'm not going to continue my ribbon here yet because I need that space. So I might just pause that for the time being. And instead, I'm going to start a secondary ribbon because this hand could be holding multiple. So I'm going to add another piece of ribbon here. So it's emerging. Doing a little bit of erasing. I'm going to add some hatching lines here, right where they emerge from the hand that looks like a fist. And then I could decide what this ribbon is doing. Let's say if I wanted this to loop around, I could draw one line, and then here's the second line from this particular ribbon. Now I'm going to draw a loop, just like that. Okay, so this looks like a loop. On this side, I need to make sure that this edge of the ribbon just disappears into this loop, and then it can reemerge on the other side. So it looks like here's the front of the ribbon, here's the inside of the ribbon. I'm going to add some construction lines on both sides, and then this would emerge here. So now this ribbon changed direction by physically looping around. And that's just a cool way to add this extra 3D element to what's essentially the negative space. If I didn't have ribbons here, this would all just be shaded black, and that would look a little bit, boring or kind of uneventful. So by having, now my ribbon can disappear behind this hand, and then maybe I'll have it reemerge up at the top. So now that same ribbon could pop in this way. I'm drawing some hatching lines each time, following this pathway, so it's right where the wrist meets the palm. I'm going to erase all of this information. And now I have my ribbon is over here. So this one traveled down, and then it looped over and went behind the wrist and then emerged up and over. So now I can have this, maybe I'll have this go behind these two ribbons and then emerge up and over on this side. So now here's the ribbon again. I'm going to have it change direction. So this line will disappear into the first line. Now it looks like I'm looking at the reverse side of it. Okay, so here's a better view of that now that I did that little bit of erasing. I'm going to add hatching lines, hatching lines, hatching lines in each of those areas. And now here I am again, down in the negative space, deciding what I want to do with this ribbon. And I think what I'm going to do is bring this line up, have this line disappear into it, and then bring this line over and have this travel downwards this way. So it looks like the ribbon goes like whoop, and changes direction, and then changes direction again. Okay, so here's what that's looking like so far. The ribbon definitely has potential to add a 3D element. I made the path a little different than it is here, but the idea is basically the same. And then if you still have negative space out here, we could just have the ribbon just emerge again from off the paper. So maybe there was ribbon back here, and I'm going to do that same idea of having it change direction. So now the ribbon's going this way. And then I'm going to use hatching lines to show the inside. And now I filled up that space. Okay, so that's what we're doing. When we get to outlining, all of these lines are going to be outlined with the thinnest marker you have in the hand and in the ribbon. And then the outside, we'll use a bigger black marker to just fill everything in solid black, which will help to pull the hands as well as the ribbons forward.